All right, so let's dive into this world of U.S. energy policy. It's only day 3 for the new Energy Secretary, Chris Wright, and CNBC already has 2 interviews. We're going to take a deep dive into those today.
Interesting starting point. I mean, this new secretary,
Mm-hmm.
he's the CEO of a fracking company
Yeah.
and on the board of a nuclear energy company.
Talk about a resume. I mean, what does that tell you about where U.S. energy policy might be heading?
It definitely suggests a more, I don't know, hands-on approach
Yeah.
to energy
Oh,
production.
yeah.
He's coming from the private sector,
Yeah.
where the focus is on streamlining operations and maximizing output. It'll be interesting to see how that translates to the public sector.
For sure. And speaking of complexities, there's this whole DOJ deep dive that's got people talking. There's this team of young consultants from the Department of Justice. They're poking around the Department of Energy. And some folks are worried that they're accessing sensitive information.
Yeah, Secretary Wright addressed that. He said that this team, they're solely focused on finding efficiencies within the DOE,
Mm-hmm.
especially in budgeting and procurement processes. He assured everyone that they have the necessary clearances,
Yeah.
but they are not accessing classified data.
Okay, so do we have any insight into what systems or processes they might be modernizing? The DOE is not really known for being, you know, cutting edge.
Right. That's what's interesting. Even small changes in how the DOE operates could have a ripple effect. Like,
Yeah.
for example, imagine if they streamline the approval process
Mm.
for new energy projects. That could speed up development timelines. Or what if they could use, more sophisticated data analytics to forecast energy demand?
Yeah.
Or optimize grid management. Those kinds of changes could have a real impact.
Yeah, so less about the consultants being whiz kids and more about bringing a fresh perspective to a,
Yeah.
traditionally bureaucratic agency.
Yeah, exactly. It's about finding ways to make the DOE more nimble and responsive in this rapidly changing energy landscape.
Okay, so efficiency seems to be a theme. And that leads us to the administration's stance on oil and gas. Sounds like drill, baby, drill is back on the menu, but they also want to keep prices down and make sure energy investments remain attractive. Is that even possible?
It's a delicate balancing act. Secretary Wright says that previous policies, especially the ones focused on restricting drilling on federal lands and slowing down pipeline approvals, he says those policies actually increased production costs for U.S. companies,
Mm-hmm.
and that made them less competitive globally, which hurt American energy independence.
But wouldn't ramping up production lead to more environmental concerns? How does that fit with climate goals?
Those are valid points, and we'll have to see how they navigate those tensions. What's interesting is that he's framing this as a pro-growth strategy. He argues that a more efficient operating environment for oil and gas companies will
Yeah.
lead to lower costs for consumers.
So they're betting on increased efficiency to offset the downsides of increased production. But what about the impact on our relationship with Canada? There's been talk of potential tariffs on Canadian oil imports,
Yeah.
which seems to contradict this whole pro-growth approach.
That's where things get even more complicated. You have to remember, energy policy is rarely just about energy. It's also economics and geopolitics and national security.
Right, and Secretary Wright did mention those tariffs being part of a larger strategy to address border security and drug trafficking, even though they could lead to price increases. And he even brought up Canada potentially diverting their oil to Asia. He called it the nuclear option. I'm not sure if he meant that literally, though.
It definitely highlights the high stakes involved. The U.S. and Canada have a very integrated energy relationship. Any disruption could have ripple effects for both economies. Welcome back to our deep dive into U.S. energy policy.
We've been unpacking Secretary Wright's first few days, and it's been pretty crazy.
We were just talking about those potential tariffs on Canadian oil and the balancing act that the administration has to do.
Yeah. Which brings us to another hot topic, the Inflation Reduction Act and what it means for renewables. There's been a lot of uncertainty about what this new administration will do with all the wind and solar projects.
Well, Secretary Wright has been pretty clear about his commitment to what he calls affordable, reliable, secure American energy. And he's said that all energy projects, no matter where they come from, will be judged on whether they can contribute to those goals.
So does that mean that wind and solar, they might not be the priority anymore?
It's hard to say for sure, but what he's saying suggests a change in focus. I mean, the previous administration was all about renewables as the most important part of their energy policy. This administration seems to be more pragmatic. They want projects that give immediate results when it comes to cost and reliability.
That makes sense considering his background and his goals, but wouldn't shifting away from renewables hurt our progress on climate change?
That's the big question.
Yeah.
And it's something that we have to watch closely. It's worth pointing out that Secretary Wright, he hasn't totally dismissed renewables. He's just saying that they're not going to get a free pass.
So
They'll have to prove they're worth it, just like all the other energy sources.
it's kind of a wait-and-see approach.
Yeah, exactly. Evaluate each project on its own merits. And remember, the Inflation Reduction Act put a lot of funding towards clean energy projects. It'll be interesting to see what the administration does with that money. Do they stick with what's already in motion? Or do they change focus to other areas?
Speaking of other areas, Secretary Wright said that he did not want the U.S. to follow Germany's path when it comes to energy transition. He talked about how their investment in renewables led to higher prices and a decrease in production.
Yeah, the German case has been a warning for a lot of countries trying to figure out
Yeah.
how to decarbonize their energy systems. Germany decided to phase out nuclear power and really quickly scale up renewables. But they didn't expect how hard it would be to integrate intermittent sources like solar and wind into the grid.
So it's not just about building more wind turbines and solar panels. You need a way to manage all the changes in supply and demand.
Exactly. And you need to invest a lot in grid infrastructure
Yeah.
and energy storage and demand-side management. It's complicated. And Germany shows us that we need a good plan and a realistic idea of the costs and benefits.
It sounds like Secretary Wright is being more careful,
I think so.
putting reliability and affordability alongside environmental goals.
Yeah, he seems to be emphasizing a made-in-America approach, focusing on domestic production and being less reliant on foreign imports.
Which brings us back to nuclear power. I mean, considering his history on the board of a nuclear company, it makes sense that he sees nuclear as a big part of things. But how do you reconcile that with all the problems that nuclear has, like cost overruns and long construction times? I mean, look at that new plant in Georgia. Talk about over budget and behind schedule.
That's the question, isn't it? People who like nuclear energy, like Secretary Wright, say that those problems can be solved with innovation and streamlined regulations and better project management.
So basically, they think we can do nuclear better and faster if we learn from our past mistakes.
Exactly. And they're pointing to advancements in small modular reactors, or SMRs, as a potential game changer. They say that these smaller, more flexible reactors could be cheaper and more scalable than traditional nuclear plants.
But even if we could build nuclear plants faster, what about the nuclear waste?
Well, that's a big concern for a lot of people, for sure. And it has to be addressed. There are some promising new technologies being developed, like advanced recycling and deep geological repositories. That might help with those concerns.
It sounds like there's still a lot to do, both with the technology and how people feel about it, before nuclear can really be a major part of U.S. energy.
I agree. It's a long game. And we don't know if this administration can make a nuclear comeback happen.
Okay, so we've covered oil and gas and renewables and nuclear. What else are we missing?
Well, we've been talking about energy sources. But there's something else that's really important, how we actually use the energy we make. We touched on this a little bit. But energy efficiency deserves a closer look.
For sure. It's about using less energy, like making our homes and businesses more energy efficient.
Exactly. And it's often called the invisible fuel because it's not something we burn or dig up, but it can have a big effect on our energy needs and on how we affect the environment.
It's like getting more from our energy. And I remember reading that energy efficiency is one of the cheapest ways to cut carbon emissions.
Absolutely. If we use energy better in our houses and businesses and cars, we can lower our energy bills and reduce our impact on the environment. It's a win-win.
Even though Secretary Wright didn't talk much about energy efficiency, how do you think it fits into his plan for U.S. energy?
Well, he didn't come right out and say it.
Yeah.
But I think it fits with his focus on affordable, reliable, secure American energy.
I see what you mean. If we use less energy, it becomes cheaper. The grid is more reliable. We don't have to depend on foreign energy as much.
Exactly. And it's a strategy that works everywhere. Doesn't matter what energy sources we use.
So energy efficiency, it's like a hidden part of his plan.
I like that. And it's something that we can all do. From homeowners making small changes to big companies changing how they manage energy.
So we've added another piece to this energy puzzle.
We have.
Where do we go from here?
Well, there's still more to uncover in our deep dive. Trust me, there are some really interesting things coming up.
Ooh, you've got me hooked. And we're back for our final look at U.S. energy policy. We covered a lot, from drill, maybe drill, to nuclear energy and energy efficiency.
Yeah, and for our final act, let's shift gears and look at something that's been getting a lot of attention lately. Geothermal.
Geothermal, you mean like using heat from the earth? It's always seemed kind of niche to me, mostly for places with volcanoes.
Yeah, that's the old way of thinking about it. But it's actually way more interesting than that. There have been a lot of advancements,
Hmm.
especially with enhanced geothermal systems,
Hmm.
or EGS. And those have really opened up the possibilities.
EGS? What is?
So it's basically a way to create artificial geothermal reservoirs. They inject water into hot, dry rock deep underground. Kind of like making the same conditions you'd find in a natural geothermal hotspot, but in places where it wasn't possible before.
So they're like making their own geothermal power plants? That's wild. Does that mean we could have geothermal energy pretty much anywhere?
Not exactly anywhere,
Yeah.
but it does make it possible to use geothermal in a lot more places. And that's why people are so excited about it. It's not just about where you can use it, though. Geothermal has some advantages over other renewables.
Oh, yeah, like what?
Well, for one, it's a baseload energy source. That means it can provide a steady flow of electricity 24/7, which is different from solar and wind, because those depend on the weather.
That's huge. A reliable, renewable source that's not affected by the weather. That could be a game changer.
Right. And another thing, geothermal plants don't take up as much space
Mm-hmm.
compared to like solar farms or wind turbines, so they have less of an impact on the environment.
So geothermal seems great. It's renewable, it's reliable, it has a small footprint, and now we can use it in more places because of EGS. What's the catch?
Well, there is still some things they need to figure out. EGS is still a pretty new technology, and there are issues with cost and the drilling techniques and making sure they get the right kind of fractures in the rock to create those reservoirs.
Hmm.
It's not as easy as it sounds.
I see. New technologies always come with some growing pains, but it seems like the potential is there. Did Secretary Wright say anything about geothermal in those interviews? I don't remember him mentioning it specifically.
He didn't say the word geothermal, but I think it fits right in with his vision. Remember, he wants affordable, reliable, secure American energy, and geothermal fits that. Plus, he's all about innovation and getting things done.
Hmm?
So I wouldn't be surprised if geothermal becomes a big part of his plan.
It's like a hidden connection between all the different parts of his energy strategy.
Exactly. It just shows you that sometimes things come together in unexpected ways.
But we've looked at a lot of different angles of U.S. energy policy. With this new administration, we saw the return of drill, baby, drill, a new way of thinking about renewables, a renewed interest in nuclear, the importance of energy efficiency, and now this potential with geothermal. It's a lot to think about.
It is. But the main thing I want you to take away from this is that energy is really complicated. There are no simple answers. And every decision has its pros and cons.
That's true. It's easy to just focus on the headlines, but it's much more complicated than that.
Yeah, and that's why it's important to stay informed
Mm.
and to talk about these things and to ask questions, because the choices we make about energy today will have an impact for a long time, and we all need to be part of that conversation.
Well said. We gave you a lot to think about today. Hopefully now you understand U.S. energy policy a little better.
And maybe you'll even see some connections that other people miss.
That's right.
Who knows? Maybe you'll be the one to come up with the next big idea for clean, affordable, reliable energy.
Keep thinking, everyone, and join us next time for another deep dive
Yeah.
into something completely different. Until then, stay curious and keep exploring.